happening now. Okay, so anytime you want to take over, you may.
Okay, let's see. All right, can you see that?
I can see it just fine.
Okay. All right, well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Suzanne Dietze. I've written over 25 romances, both historical and contemporary. I write for Harlequin Love Inspired, as well as published with a Christian publisher called Barber. And so this topic is really geared for authors who either write romance or have a romantic element to your story. But I hope no matter what you write, there'll be something in here that's of help to you. So if you have any, without further ado, I guess we can go ahead and get started.
Yes, we can get started. I do post a replay in the group tomorrow, and I will send you a link to the replay also, Susie, so that you can use it as you choose.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, the first thing I want to talk about is what romantic chemistry is, because it's really a difficult thing to define. We describe it metaphorically, and it varies by culture, but it's a connection, a rapport, or a bond that people have. It's what makes, it's like the click between two people and draws them to want to be with each other. Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca have had undeniable chemistry since 1943. So we know when we as readers or viewing movies or television that chemistry really can't be faked or forced. When it's not authentic, it's obvious. So since I write sweet stories and for the inspirational market, sometimes I do this presentation, and I've had questions about this, so I thought I would put this in, that romantic chemistry doesn't have anything to do with the heat level of the story. It's a misconception. Chemistry is the spark, the tension. It's not the extent of sexual content or how graphically it's displayed. So if you think of it as a continuum, you know, we have the wholesome or sweet stories on one end, working up all the way to erotic. There's different levels, and it's described differently depending on what group you're in. So inspirationals, because I get asked this a lot too, does that mean they're basically the same as sweet stories? No. The book on the left is a Harlequin Heartwarming, which is the sweetest line they have, and it's secular, meaning there's no faith element at all. On the right is sort of famous in inspirational romance circles for having quite a bit of romantic or sexual tension in it. So all it really has to do is with the faith arc. And it's different by publishing house guidelines, what you are, how far you're allowed to go or address certain things. So why is it important? I think as writers, we all love Dead Poets Society, because when he says poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. And whatever you write, romance, the characters should have that connection. And I've got 3 reasons why I think we need it. The first is for authenticity, because you can spot a fake from a mile away. So this is from A Star is Born. I actually did not see this movie, but I saw Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper perform at the Oscars. And I also remember seeing a lot of headlines about whether or not they were having a relationship. And they say they never did, but boy, did they sell it. They sold it really well. Reader engagement is another reason why we need to have chemistry in our stories, because the lack of chemistry pulls a reader from our story. We want to keep our readers sitting in the chair and not doing chores or going to sleep or anything else. We want them to finish the story. So I don't know about you guys, but when I read Little Women a zillion years ago, I really wanted Jo to pick Lori, and she didn't. Of course, that's a debate that people are still having. So that's one reason why I brought it up for reader engagement, is because it's important to a lot of people. It really made readers invested. Chemistry makes a book hard to put down and makes us want to talk about it. The other reason why we want to have it is conflict. Now, in real life, we do not want conflict in our romantic relationships, but in our writing, we need it. The chemistry between our main characters should never be convenient. And if they act on it, it's going to cause a whole heap of trouble. So this picture is from the movie While You Were Sleeping. Just in case you haven't seen that rom-com, Sandra Bullock's character sort of has a crush on a guy she's never met, saves him from getting hit by a train, but then he's in a coma and a nurse thinks that she's his fiance. So she sort of goes along with it, and then she ends up falling in love with the comatose guy's brother. So she's in a love triangle with somebody she really likes, and a comatose guy, and it's just a huge mess that involves his entire extended family. So there's no way she can act on it. So why don't we go ahead and dig in on chemistry. So chemistry, one way to think of it in our romances is, how do they say I love you without words? How does the reader know they love each other without the words being said? So let's talk about the chemistry. There's several types of chemistry, actually. If you do a Google search, you can find long lists of different types of chemistry. I'm only going to focus on intellectual, emotional, and physical, because I think that the others can overlap quite a bit. And you'll see what I mean as I talk, but it's something that you can look up if you're interested in learning more about different types of chemistry. Spiritual chemistry, of course, being people have the same faith system. Activity chemistry, both enjoy basketball, basket weaving, whatever, hiking, it's your life. Social chemistry, you respond the same way in certain social situations. I believe, though, that one alone is not enough to build a story on. I think a story needs all three of these, and that they should weave into the character arcs and into their conflict, both internal and external. It creates a richer tapestry. And I also think that each type of chemistry should have a barrier to the characters acting on them that has to be overcome. So it's not something that's easy. It takes commitment on the character's part. Just because you feel it doesn't mean you can act on it. So let's talk about intellectual first. This little meme with Mr. Darcy is not what I mean by intellectual chemistry. It doesn't have anything necessarily to do with your IQ, how good you are at math, your high school GPA. What it has to do with is working together, a meeting of the minds. You'll see this a lot in a lot of sort of cop buddy shows and movie ideas like Magnum PI, and I'm going to use more examples as we go on, where the couple is mismatched, but they have a similar goal. The thing about them being this is, no matter how mismatched they are, they have a natural flow in their communication. They can solve problems together. They work well together despite the ways that they have big differences between them. That's because they have a mutual goal. They have a mutual belief system. They may start with competing goals, but they do need to come into an aligned goal to work on together. One thing that intellectual chemistry in our romances can do is highlight the character traits that our main characters have by highlighting partnership, respect. They spark off one another, they solve issues, but it's also about how they disagree. They challenge each other, but they aren't mean. They are refining each other. So again, another mismatched sort of couple crime solving duo castle there. How do we engage intellectual chemistry? Well, through action in our stories. The key here is adhesion. The characters have to have a reason to be stuck together early in the story, despite their conflicts, despite their initial antipathy toward each other. Their shared goal is more important than their differences. Because you have to have adhesion pretty early in a romance, in my opinion, it has the shortest lived barrier. I think you need to have some adhesion for the couple early on in the story. We can't just have them running into each other on the street all the time. They have to have some specific plot reason why they're getting together. So, ways that we can engage intellectual chemistry and show it using words and dialogue. So, how do they talk to each other? What does that reveal? The dialogue can showcase their differences while highlighting their common goals and beliefs. So yet another example of the mismatch sort of crime-solving TV show was Bones, which I love that show. It's been off the air for a little while now, but Temperance, the female, is a forensic anthropologist. Booth is the FBI agent, and they solve murders. She says, these bones you bring me, I'm the one who finds out who they are and their stories and what happens to them. And I can return them to their loved ones, because when they're found, nobody knows who they are. But then you take care of the bad guy. And I really like that about our partnership. And he says, so do I. And it's obvious from the subtext of how they're looking at each other, because I clearly don't have good acting skills. How they're looking at each other and the tone of voice, that they're saying more than what they're saying. But the fact is that they're expressing appreciation for their partnership. Okay, so dialogue can be really fun, or it can go deep, but it just shows that they're good partners. Again, doesn't mean that they can't disagree. They can be extremely different people. They can be very opposites, but the ability to communicate and show respect to each other are key. Excuse me just 1 second for a sip of tea. Okay. So now we're going to move on to emotional chemistry. I don't know if any of you saw Always Be My Maybe, they're childhood friends in this movie. So what emotional chemistry is, it's kind of paramount in romance novels, but it's not about falling in love. It's not about the emotional arc. It's about the emotional arc. It's not about the whole process of falling in love, not specifically. This is when characters connect with each other on a really deep personal level. It's based on their shared experiences or their awareness or their worldview. This is where the characters feel they have a safe space where they get each other. And they want the best for the other person. So it's not just about how well we handle this goal that's keeping us together. This is about how I'm becoming a better person when I'm around you. It's really important because it affects the character arc in the romance for each of the characters. They're going to grow from page 1 to page 300. They're going to change. This will challenge their fears and their weaknesses, and they find a safe space in each other. So they're not going to be the same people they were at the beginning. They're better together. This is often the very last barrier breached. So if you think of intellectual chemistry as a sprint, this is a marathon. So this may not happen until the very last page of a story, or very close. This is sort of resolves with the declaration of love and everything being okay and right in the world again. So how can we engage it in action? One thing that I love this from Sense and Sensibility, where she says, time does not determine intimacy. 7 years is too long for some, 7 days is enough for others. I've sometimes had people say when they read romances, oh, the characters only knew each other a week or a month, and it's so unrealistic that they get together and have this deep emotional connection for that amount of time. Well, first of all, well, never mind that. But to me, the key here is the depth that they go to. You can certainly go through something with somebody in 7 days that other people don't go through in 7 years. So in our stories, they're going to have those opportunities to really go deep and really know each other. So whether your story takes place over a week, 7 years, a year, whatever, they're going to have the same amount of emotional depth. It just depends on the time frame. I've had a story where historical characters meet on a train, and by the end, of course, so that's only about a week long, and I think it can work if you make it work. So it does take to the final pages because the characters need that time to learn and grow. We're going to go deep, like I said, so it allows for emotional intimacy, and they have to be able to make the choice to be vulnerable and trust each other, no matter the story's time frame. Emotional chemistry also is where we sort of get into the backstory for our characters. And they need something to overcome. They need to grow out of or from an experience. So this is what I call wounds and lies. This is where I start actually when I'm writing a story. I have some ideas for plot, but I don't get into it super specifically until I figure out wounds and lies, because it ties into the plot. So the wound, what past wound emotionally has shaped the character's choices, their fears, what triggers them, their personality traits. So it can be something like growing up in poverty, being abandoned by a parent or a romantic partner. It could be a physical thing too, but it has to have some emotional reason why it scarred this person with an invisible scar, even if there is a physical scar present. The lie then is what the characters tell themselves in order to protect themselves from being hurt by the wound anymore. In a romance, often this big lie is, I'm not worthy of love because. I don't want love because. I do not want love with this person, or I do not want love at this time because. And it has to do with their lie. I find that these are essential to the Black moment of the story. So this is where I mentioned plotting. This is where it comes in. The wound's going to rear its ugly head in the Black moment of the stories. And the characters at that point will choose to believe their big lies and will retreat from the healing and relationship in the romantic relationship. This is one of my favorite resources for this. It's a book called The Emotional Wound Thesaurus. I don't know if you all are familiar with the writing thesaurus by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi. I'll show you, and I'll show you again at the end, but it looks like this. You can get it as an ebook for a couple dollars. I like the paperback because I don't know if you can see, but I have tons of post-it notes and scribbles and notes in mine. I really do make heavy use of that. And it describes dozens of emotional wounds and how that affects, could possibly affect a person and the choices they make. And it's geared for writers. So it's actually very helpful brainstorming ideas of how a person can overcome these, what opportunities they might have. So when they're facing their wounds and lies in the context of a relationship, the characters are not only going to heal themselves, but they want to play a part in the healing of the other. They're going to support one another. They're going to give each other some sort of gift that enables them to heal. This is really, think of terms of shows of support, decisions to trust, listening ear, going with you to face someone who's hurt you. Grand gestures. This is where you think of these sorts of things. And Once Upon a Time was a TV show. It's been off the air for a little while too. I loved Captain Hook's character, first of all, because he came on the show as a villain. And by the time the show was over, he was a hero. And he and Emma had a relationship where they both are overcoming very deep, difficult, painful wounds from their past. And they function so much better as a team after really seeing the other person for who they are and creating that safe space. I see we have a question in the chat. Yes, the emotional thesaurus is great. All right. Yeah, I love those books. Another way that you can explore emotional chemistry in action is using the 5 love languages. So Dr. Gary Chapman says that there are 5 languages of love that each of us speak when we give love and speak to receive love. Oftentimes, the way that we show love is not the way we best receive it. And oftentimes the way it's natural for us to show love is not necessarily the way our partner receives, not the same language. The languages are gift giving, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, physical touch, which is not just sex. So determining what your beloved's love language or need is can require some vulnerability and sacrifice, because it puts your beloved's need over your own. So for example, if you think about relationships you've been in, or even with your family members, children, parents, we often don't speak the same language. So it costs something emotionally if somebody needs physical touch, and that's very difficult for you. So imagine a child whose need is physical touch growing up with a mother who had suffered some sort of abuse and really is uncomfortable with touch. That can create a whole host of conflict. So I love this little scene from Bones too, where he wants her company, just not to talk. She probably really would want to talk. I know I would, but she's giving him what he needs. So there's the website if you want to look further into that. Another way to engage emotional chemistry using words. So for dialogue, this isn't flirting. We'll get to that with physical, but it lets things slip out that evoke feeling. You're not saying I love you, but you're saying something so the reader knows that that's what they're saying. It can hint at inner conflict, like this from The Princess Bride. Wesley is her servant. He's the farm boy. She is much higher above him in the station. And so he said, as you wish, all the time. But of course, what he was saying was, I love you. Sometimes no words help. Sometimes context is key. But I love being able to use dialogue in ways so the reader knows what it means, even if the other characters don't quite know what it means. So now physical chemistry, which is so much easier to define, isn't it? Because it's attraction, it's our physical response. It can happen at first sight, it can bud over time. It is not the same as love scenes. This is tension, this is building the attraction. It takes a lot longer to breach this barrier, the sweeter the story. In some, in other books, sometimes the barrier is breached halfway. It's the midpoint when the first love scene happens, or sometimes early on, then the midpoint. You can do other things when you write sweeter, but not a love scene or a kiss generally. You can do other things with touch, so I'll get to that. Let's talk about that. When you engage physical chemistry, how I think of it is like a little spoon of salt water to the character's thirst. What you give the character and the reader is going to give them a little bit of quenching that lasts a minute, and then it's going to make them thirstier. So I like to try to draw it out as best we can. So what happens when we experience physical chemistry as human beings? So internally in our own bodies and our brains, the brains fill with a bunch of chemicals. I know you all know this: dopamine, oxytocin, norepinephrine. So we can feel euphoric. Later we crash to a low. That's how we get sort of an addictive feeling toward wanting to be around that person. The other thing that happens is the fight or flight responses, which can make us feel jittery, hyper aware. You can feel these things, of course, in your own body. So the next time you feel something like this, you can take notes, or you can also Google and see how this is manifested in some people. But of course, when you feel it in your gut. If you're in the woods and a bear comes to chase you, your body doesn't want to spend any energy digesting food. It wants to send your energy to your leg so you can run, to your arm so you can fight. So oftentimes these chemicals make you nauseous, unable to eat. Your extremities might tingle. You can feel sensation in your head, your heart's pounding, your breathing comes faster, possibly more shallow. And all those things happen without us trying to do it. How does it look on the outside to other people? Well, and this is fun too. So all the longing stares into someone's eyes, at their lips, their hair. You can't stop laughing around them or smiling because they're just so funny. You think voices can change, go deeper or higher in pitch. We get louder, or we can't talk at all because we're nervous. Open body language, mirroring movements. The beloved crosses legs. I cross my legs the same way. We aren't folded up tight, arms folded. We're more open, inviting. Blushing perhaps is cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. It happens. Pupils dilate in times of arousal. Another thing that can happen, women often more than men play with their hair. We fidget. We pick up a pen or coffee cup or napkin, whatever we are, and we'll fiddle with it. You find excuses to touch a person or be near them. Daydream about them, bring them up in conversation, obsess over them. Those things are all examples of things that we can't necessarily control. We catch ourselves doing, perhaps. So touch is, I think, just a super exceptional way to, of course, start engaging this. Innocent gestures trigger messiness, and I love it. So if you've watched The Sound of Music, there's Marie and the captain dancing the Lindler. They're just demonstrating for the children that she's their governess. It's demonstrating how to do a folk dance. But of course, this is when she realizes she's in love with the captain, and she's supposed to be a nun, and she's there to be his nanny. And so she has to run away and go back to the Abbey. The other picture is from Pride and Prejudice, the 2005 version, where Mr. Darcy hands Elizabeth into the carriage. So obviously her touch affected him because she notices when he walks away that he's flexing his hand. She's not 100% sure, I don't think, whether he's repulsed or really moved in a positive way, but she knows it affects him. And I think by this time, look at that stare. I think she knows that he's feeling it. So even the most mundane things in your story, if you put a touch in, can change everything, can be life changing. Oops, I went the wrong way. Okay, so how can we use dialogue or words to engage physical chemistry? Well, this is where flirtation comes in, banter. There at Magnum PI at the bottom, she says, must we really walk arm in arm while they're undercover? And of course, she totally wants to walk arm in arm because she doesn't want him to know that. Sometimes awkward dialogue where things slip out and then a character has to backtrack. That can be fun. I like this sort of arrogant swoon, I will catch you thing from The English Patient. Internal words can count too, of course, where we use deep point of view when we're in the character's thoughts and brain, where they're addressing how their attraction affects their emotions, their wounds, and their lives. So again, this chemistry should not be convenient for them. So the character is going to fight it, even though the physical attraction is strong. They're going to fight against it. So this is just a little story from about the most wholesome family show I can think of right now, called When Calls the Heart on the Hallmark Channel. And if you watch the show, you know it's changed a lot in the last few years. But this is from the first season, and it's based on a Christian book called When Calls the Heart, about a school teacher in Canada. She goes to a small town to teach, and there she is, Elizabeth, and the Mountie in the town, his name is Jack, and they're attracted to each other. It's very obvious to us as the viewers, but they're fighting. He really thinks that if Mounties were supposed to have wives, that they would have come issued with the uniform. So Elizabeth is going to teach her kids, they're going to do a play on the town's history, excuse me. So somebody in town, they don't know who, painted this backdrop for them of the landscape. And it's great. They're so happy. And then they're rolling it up afterwards, and the kids notice that whoever did it painted Elizabeth and Jack kissing in it. And you have to use a magnifying glass to see it, but it is so embarrassing. Kids are woo, they're telling their parents, and so Elizabeth has to tell Jack so he doesn't hear it from somewhere else. She's like, well, this is really embarrassing, and I don't want to tell you, but somebody painted us kissing. And he's like, oh, we were kissing? That's just ridiculous. We would never kiss. And of course, as the viewer, you know that they totally want to kiss. And there they are having this awkward conversation about how they don't want to kiss when they totally want to kiss. And the viewer then also finds out that Jack, of course, is the one who painted it in the first place. So the viewer is in on things as the reader would be, that makes us get all ooh and giddy and enjoy that. No touching involved, no actual kissing happen in this, but it gives a lot of the same sort of feels. It builds it up. So we're finally going to kiss now. So when we have an action, I have two kinds of kisses. I don't know if there's a real name for it. I call it the risk kiss and the reward kiss. So the risk kiss happens earlier in the book. It should cause a lot of trouble and increase the conflict because it is not convenient and the characters are going to like it, but they're going to regret it right away. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lip kiss. So from Outlander, if you've read the book or watched the series, they sort of have to get married. But of course, she wants to come back to the 20th century. She's stuck a few hundred years in the past. They have to get married, but and she's not going to stay, but it's really obvious she's into Jamie. And he says, when you kiss me like that, maybe you weren't so sorry to be marrying me after all. But I mean, look at Jimmy. Woo. So I also have a couple of I have a mail order bride story that I wrote and a marriage of convenience story where, of course, they have to kiss at the beginning, and the kisses are zingers, and it sort of messes up the comfortable arrangement. Those are risk kisses. Reward kisses happen at the end. They cement the relationship. It's a celebration. So when we're going to have the kiss, we're going to ratchet up the tension. We want to make it worth waiting for. So I like to think of it as there's a storm in the air and lightning is going to strike. So we have to, you know how that feels when it just feels like the air is different and the hair stands up at the back of your neck. You know something big's going to happen. So you try to set that scene. So remember going back to our brain chemicals, our fight or flight response. We can't breathe. It's hard. We might be trembling from adrenaline. The heart could be pounding. It might be hard to talk. Our senses are going into overdrive. Heighten that, use that, stay in that moment. If you're writing inspirational and sweet, sometimes you have to watch your word choice, depending on what you're writing. And so if you're writing for a particular publisher, of course, you want to sort of see what they do. And you also, it helps to weave the emotional into the physical. It's in the context of the emotional arc, because this kiss is going to change everything. So there it is, our bolt of lightning. The very slightest touch is heightened. This is just no ordinary kiss. This is true love always in our story. So we want this to be a very big deal. So now that we've kissed, sometimes in some sweet or inspirational stories, the kiss actually happens after the I love you, sometimes the other way around, but I love you tends to be one of the last things that happens. So we've worked really hard to be able to say this for these characters. So we don't want to just come right out and say it. We want to be as vulnerable, have our characters be as vulnerable as possible. We want it to be satisfying on all levels of chemistry. So our intellectual, emotional, and physical chemistry. This one on the bottom right, I love that show, Alias. And I love when he said that he had this watch, he kept perfect time. you could set your heart by the watch and it broke the day we met. And it's like, oh, you set your heart by that watch. And to all the ways I've loved before, he has a very heartfelt declaration basically saying that his heart belongs to her. She can do whatever she wants to it, even break it. So we're finally being fully vulnerable, laying it all on the line. Then I love you. So then we say what it is. Say that how it is, we're vulnerable and the feelings are reciprocated. The plot is complete and we can celebrate. I want to tie it in a bow. I personally love epilogues. Not everybody does, but I love epilogues and I like to have a little bit of zip in those too with chemistry if possible. Not everybody does, but we want our romance to end with a happily ever after. So thank you very much for everything. I can stop sharing the screen unless, were there any slides anybody which would like me to return to or any questions that I
The
can-
last slide, please, so I can go to your website.
Oh, sure. You know what? I can also put it in the chat if that's easier. If I can find the chat. Okay. There, and I'll put it back too if you want. There it is. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, I have
Well,
totally lost.
I don't see your slide, but I saw it in the chat.
Okay, well, hang on. I did something wrong and lost everything.
Oh.
I can't, there we are. Okay. All right. Thank you. I did that wrong. I'm not the tech great. So there are a couple other authors named Suzanne Dietze out there, just so you know. One writes nonfiction on horseback riding. She's German. And there's another one who's a historian. So neither one of those are me. But I do write historical and contemporary. So I like it all. So I'd love to know what you guys do, what you like to write, and if you have any questions.
I liked your comment about epilogues. I've always been kind of between and betwixt as to whether or not to include them. And I was talking with another author recently. Donna knows her, Erica Alexander, and she said that, and I don't remember which organization it was, had done a survey a few years ago. And I was very surprised to find out that a survey of romance readers was overwhelmingly, like 80% or something like that, liked having an epilogue at the end of the romance. So that's
Okay,
really
that's
kind
a good.
yeah, that's really kind of changed my whole thinking about epilogues, because I had heard a long time ago, you can't have an epilogue if you don't have a prologue, and you don't want to necessarily water things down with a prologue. So I think what it is that some of the rules, so to speak, that I learned in school 80 zillion years ago aren't necessarily true today. Things do change, and I have to remember to change my stuff along with it.
Things do change. Things can change rapidly, and sometimes it's hard to keep up with industry changes or reader expectations.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad to know that statistic. That's a really great evidence right there for writing making me want to make sure I write an epilogue.
Right, and don't quote me on the statistic, but you can look that up, I'm sure. But it was a huge number that really opened my eyes. It was overwhelmingly, yes, we want epilogues. And since then I have read that if you're writing a good romance that people get really tied into, and I know I have felt this myself, you don't want to let go of the characters at the end. You really kind of want to hold on to them a little bit longer, and epilogues allow you to do that.
Absolutely. And I like knowing people really are going to be happy, that they that a year or 2 months down the line or whatever, everything is still a-okay. The world is right, you know. Let's see. I see a question from Carolyn. Is there a resource that helps with banter? Oh, if there is, I would like to read it. I don't have one. So if any of you happen to know of any good resources, I know there are books on dialogue. One thing that I've noticed and I'm always working on with myself is dialogue tags. How many have that sort? Because sometimes with banter, if it reads quickly, then it feels more like banter. So fewer dialogue tags, but you have to have some in there. So that's something I'm still working on. But if I find anything, I can, I'll let you know. And if you find something,
yeah, a dialogue tag or occasionally an action movement, if you can have an action by a character without having to tag who is speaking, but it still identifies them. Because I know that for me, although I like the rapidity of the bantering going on back and forth, but sometimes it's like I have to stop and say, well, who's talking? I get perhaps I read it too fast.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Carolyn says that she nixes dialogue tags. Excellent to use action beats and frame of mind. Absolutely. That is a perfect answer. I like that too. Rather than, the she said, he said, that he
Right.
stared at her a certain way or something. Yes.
Yeah, and that's another thing about the dialogue tags. I have read so many different times that you don't have to have all these different dialogue tags of, that he said, she said is fine, that a reader doesn't really see it because they know it. And yet for me, that is so untrue. I have read books where the only dialogue tag is said and they just jump out of the page at me and slap me in the face. So, I do vary mine, but I have tried very hard to get away from them.
Yeah, and that's a very good answer. I think any sort of beat, action beat, an internal thought, a dialogue tag, any of that in banter as sparingly as possible is sort of my personal feeling on that, but I haven't seen that anywhere just because it keeps things moving faster in the reader's brain and as the characters are speaking. Oh, okay, let's see. Body beats to build on. Oh, okay, excellent. I'm going to look that up. I'm going to write that down right now. April Gardner's body beats to build on. Thank you. Yeah, because we do sometimes too, or and their action beats consist of nodding or smiling or maybe laughing or something. And that gets really old really fast. So in fact, when I'm done writing a book, I do a search. I use Word, so I do the find feature and just put smiled in there, and so I can take a bunch of them out. I do that a lot because sometimes when you're writing, especially in the first draft, you're not exactly sure what they're doing, and so you want a tag or a beat in there, and so you put something in, and then I go through and delete it. But yeah, nodding heads and shaking their head and the smiling is very, very done. I do it too much too, I'm sure.
Yeah, Susie, I don't know who put that in there. Maybe it was Carolyn. Put the link to that body beats, and you can just copy that off of the chat onto like a Word document, and then you have it. I'm not sure if anybody but me gets the chat. I know when I record, the chat comes out too, but I don't know if anybody else gets the chat.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I've got it. So thank you. I'm also going to put, so you may see like my personal, any of you, I'd love to be friends with you. I'm a Susie Dietze, and it's the very German spelling. Let's see, and my author page on Facebook though is Suzanne Dietze Books. So we can connect somehow too, because I do love sharing resources and learning. I'm really grateful for this book resource. I love when writers help each other. I love how we build each other up.
Yeah.
So.
Well, when I post the link to the video, I will put some of these links in the body of that too, so that people have them. So that's great.
Excellent. Thank you. Oh,
Donna,
here's okay. So emotional beats.
Yeah, Donna, did you have any questions? You're lurking back there. I know you are.
I'm getting all these too. Thank you, Donna. That's awesome. Donna and Carolyn, what do you write? What do you write? Historical, contemporary, sweet?
I was all over the place until recently. This amazing gentleman, Michael Lee, he's amazing marketer, and he's pretty prominent in the Vela community. He told me I'm fantasy. Right now, I am totally digging light novels, but American style. I try to keep things sweet, and I really, really appreciate this presentation because I am a very sensual person naturally. And I love how this was, you can be sensual without crossing lines. And I feel that you gave very clear definitions of how to do that, of how to stay sweet and stay within this target audience without going overboard, without turning it into something more than it should be. Oh, thank you so much. It's awesome. I took lots of notes.
I'm so glad it was helpful. I think, depending on what we all write different things. Some of us write for different types of publishers or self-published. So we sometimes have restrictions, sometimes we don't. I think I mentioned at the beginning, I write for Harlequin Love Inspired, which I think is like the most restrictive on the sexual aspect of, of a relationship of any other publisher than Barber, certainly, which I think is kind of interesting because people always think of Harlequin as being, far, of course, they have different lines. What it comes down to is reader expectation. If you're writing for certain publishers, or if you're writing for a YA audience, or if you're writing whatever, readers have expectations. And so sometimes wanting to write to fulfill that specific reader explanation. Sex is a good thing, whether, wherever you fall. I write Christian romance, but I think sex is a good thing. I just know that it's not going to be on the page of anything that I write. But that doesn't mean that I can't write kisses with zip or acknowledge that attraction and romance is a very important part of human relationships. So I love romance.
I personally think that so many times where sex is on the page that the authors forget that the tension is all the build up to that, and the longer you can put it off and still have that tension, and how do you show the tension? And that's what I was very excited about when you offered to do this, is because no matter what the heat level is, it's, I think, the building up of that tension that captures the reader and keeps them turning the page, and unless they're reading a Playboy or something like that, when they just have the pictures.
Yeah, it's true. Well, and I see that Donna writes romantic suspense. Wow, yeah, love that. And I love fantasy. I read everything. I don't think I could personally write suspense right now. I really admire people who write suspense, and I would love to write fantasy, but my brain is not there right now too. But I love to read it, so I'd love to read what everybody's writing. This is exciting. So.
Yeah. Well, okay. All right. Do we have any more questions for Susie? If not, we'll let everybody get back to their day. I will be, I have very slow internet sometimes, and so it takes a long time for me to get these loaded up and get a link to be able to post it. So it'll be tomorrow before I get things posted.
That's great. I really appreciate you all having me and putting up with me for an hour. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. You were very informative, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. I hope you all have good evenings.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.